Hey guys, in this video we're going to go over some of the RTX settings and how to achieve, I guess, a balance between what will or will not nuke your graphics card. So we've got your typical Victorian street with dinosaurs and Lamborghini setup. So we can go ahead and show off some of our some of the features. I also have a crepe myrtle it's an architectural one. I think this crepe myrtle has about 180,000 polygons. So to give you an idea of some very intricate occlusion. So let's go ahead and begin with our ray tracing settings. I'm going to hit the tilde key, which is above the tab and next to the 1, or you can go to Windows Developer Tools and then go to the output log, and I normally smash it here at the bottom. So if you don't know anything about a setting, the best way to start finding out is start typing it in. So we're going to do R, stands for rendering, ray tracing, and then question mark. You're going to put a question mark at the end of a end of a command, and it will come up and say it's a help. So 0 to disable ray tracing, 1 to turn it on. And we're going to go ahead and go through some of the rest of the settings like that. So ray tracing's already on. If it says is read only, that means it's in the config files, some of the ini files where you have to add it. So in this scene, I've got ray trace reflections on right now, and not global illumination. Instead of global illumination, in the post-processing settings, I'm using, what am I using? I'm using light propagation volumes. If I can find it, there it is. So in lieu of global illumination, we're going to go ahead and turn on light propagation volumes. And that's going to give us, let me make sure I don't have global illumination on. Okay, so light propagation volumes is going to give us an approximation of global illumination using light cubes. There's a lot more to it, but what it's going to do is it's going to assess. So we've got this green dinosaur with screen space reflections on, but we've got, no, those are ray trace reflections. We go ahead and turn reflections off. Reflections 0. There we go. Those are screen space reflections. So we're only getting the sphere, and I haven't set up any. So if I move the dinosaur away from the building, you'll notice that it's not bouncing off of the light's not bouncing off the dinosaur and hitting the building as much. So if I bring him close to it, it's going to light it up. Now, the dinosaur is a reflective, 100% reflective, just sheen of metal. But you'll see the same thing here in the trees. If I move a tree away, it's going to occlude slightly and add just a little bit of green back to the bricks. Alright, so for some of the settings that make it, so if you enable light propagation volumes, and we also enable ambient occlusion, so go ambient occlusion, 1 is on, and the ambient occlusion is set up, and it's also linked with your post-processing volume. So if I was to go here and go to ambient occlusion and I would turn it all the way down, you'll notice that our occlusion, you see how it's coming in? It's still occluding using the ray tracing, but it's controlled in the post-processing. So if I turn the radius down, so something that's like normal, I think it's set for 200, the scene looks, I guess, overly bright and nothing's grounded. So even if I set it all the way up to 500, I tend to boost it to about 1,000, and that's going to give us a sense that everything is in its proper place and there's some weight to objects. So if we go down here and look how his foot, there's no contact shadows enabled. This is all from the ambient occlusion. So if I turn that down or all the way up and do the same thing here, so we're doing pretty good, but what's not doing well are the trees and then also his body. So he's stuck between two buildings, and when you have occlusion of two objects, there's going to be less light because light's going to bounce back and forth. So I like to increase the calculation, and that's exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be dark underneath here. We've got a giant dinosaur blocking the sun. The sun's, oh, that's a bad angle. The sun's in the corner, and we've got trees blocking it. This house is for another example. But all right, so let's go. So that is our ambient occlusion. And if you look at our frames per second, go ahead and go back 0. We're at 37, 38, and 1. I mean, it's negligible, but the impact of quality is massive. So let me disable it one more time. And I'll turn this down to about 200. This is normal screen space ambient occlusion. Normally you wouldn't have it so high because it doesn't look good. You'd have to, you put it in, you tweak it around, like somewhere around here looks pretty good. But it still makes everything overly bright. So bump that back up to about 1,000, and I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion again. Excuse me. Ray trace ambient occlusion. Ray trace, thank you. Okay, so certain things that we have. We see some of the plants are glistening. To eliminate some of this is the sample counts in the ambient occlusion. So if we go to ambient occlusion, sample per pixel, let's go ahead and change that. It's on 1 right now. Again, we've got 40 frames per second, and I'm going to keep bumping this up. 2, 3, 4, and you'll notice that it hasn't really impacted our performance. And at 4 samples, all of the artifacting is almost gone. And so even if I was to go a little bit higher, 5 samples, it's essentially gone. And the same thing for the flag. If you notice that we had it at 1 sample, oh, it's not there anymore. Let me do occlusion. Occlusion is 1. Oh, looks good. Cleaned up really nicely. Sometimes on subsurface scattering, if there's not enough samples, it will look really bad and give you a very interesting effect. So I've got about 5 samples on there, and again, to prove that this is real time, we'll go ahead and move it, and it will settle in spot and look fantastic. All right, put it back. All right, next thing it's going to do is reflection. So ambient occlusion is fantastic. Occlusion, regular occlusion is going to help on small detail shadows. It's ray traced occlusion. This is probably not the best part to set it up for lighting. See if we can see regular occlusion. That's from a building. We got a sun, we got a light. Here we go. So if I put it to 1, 0, getting nothing in the scene. So to highlight some of that, I'm going to go ahead and go all the way down to the sky. And let's see if we can change our angle of the sky so we've got some lights coming in. There we go. All right. And then turn it back just a little bit. There we go. All right, let's turn occlusion on and then off. And then on one more time. All right. So what that's doing is, if you'll notice right here, we've got small details in the cascade shadows. It's kind of, it's not sharpening the shadows. It's kind of trying to transition between the different cascade maps. So with ray traced occlusion on, we're going to get sharp, clean shadows because we have a sun. So when the sun projects shadows are in very sharp, and it takes a lot for them to fall off. So Alright, that's occlusion, materials. Let's go over the next one. The next one's going to be ambient occlusion. Let's do reflections. Reflections are interesting because their performance impact is massive. So right now there's no reflections on in the scene. I'll go ahead and I'll turn them on by doing the same thing. Ray trace reflections. Turn them on. Alright, so we lost, I think, half of our frame rate. Went from 40 to 20. And then we can optimize our reflections right now. So this cube, go ahead and make it bigger, is 100% reflective, and obviously the sphere is. So if I was looking inside this sphere, or I'm sorry, this cube, and I wanted to increase the bounces, so let's go ahead and do the max bounces. I'll set that to 2. Now it's going to start picking up more and more detail as the bounces. So, but if you look at our performance, we went from 40 frames a second to 20 frames a second and slightly below. And we can get some of our performance back if we adjust the max ray distance. I'll set it to about 4,000, and that's going to cut some of the distance off. So if your reflections aren't that far, or your scene's an interior scene, if it's interior, you can just put that down to like 500 and use them everywhere you want. For the most part, for this scene, I think 5,000 is appropriate. Maybe 6,000 now. And you'll have to set all this up appropriately. I wish they were to do, did that say 70,000? I'm sure it did. Yeah, why not? Because it doesn't affect anything. If you want, the black parts that you see in the reflections are the ground where they have this water material, and that's because these translucencies and these certain materials haven't quite come over from DirectX 11 to DirectX 12, so you'll have to reset up some materials because they just don't show up. Even if you were to go on and turn on translucence, please don't crash. Great. Alright, so translucents are turned on, but nothing really changed. So I haven't quite gotten it to work yet. I followed the faster than the speed of light, how they did translucence in there, but it just isn't the same. So I'm actually going to turn that off. If anybody knows how to get that working, in the faster than speed of light, they made the windshield out of 4 separate pieces and kind of sandwiched them together. So the outside and the inside were reflective, and then there was 2 tint materials depending on which direction you were looking. No autosave. There we go. Alright, so on our reflections, to gain back some performance, you would turn down the max bounces or the samples per pixel. Right now I think it's set for 1. Nope, not 11. 1. And then if you turn down screen percentage, and well, let's cut it in half. So it looks worse, yes, but I think in the future they're going to do proportionate screen percentage. So maybe it's doing 50% ray tracing in the distance, so you're getting like major stuff, or maybe 3 bounces up front, and then as the camera moves closer to something, you're getting less aliasing, and maybe a denoiser would fix it. I don't know, but it's definitely a performance impact. Now, let's go ahead and get rid of reflections. The other things, emissive and indirect materials, this one's easy to show. So indirect, if something's lit indirectly instead of directly, and we turn this off, you'll see that all of the buildings are now indirectly lit. So that would disappear out of our shadows. And the same thing, I don't know if our shadows would work. Back to the shadows. So it's to disable shadows in there, but I don't think we have any that would show up. No. Alright. Next is going to be, let's go ahead and disable reflections. And the last one, reflections, ambient occlusion. All right. Oh, let's go over Skylight real quick. So Skylight works, and it looks great, sort of. So we get really good lighting sources from everything, but you're going to have to crank up the samples per pixel. So I normally put it somewhere around like 8 just to clean up some of the noise. So if we're going around the scene, you'll see that there's a lot of noise from the Skylight, but our performance is still really good. So this is all from just the Skylight and light propagation volumes. So if I turn the samples down to 1, I'll show you what that looks like. So this is again the samples at 1. All right, and then 2, 3, and then I'm just gonna go to 8, and then see how high we go. Let's do 16. So we're at 30 frames per second, 16 samples per pixel. Looks pretty good, and it's definitely a trade-off from doing global illumination. So let's go ahead and turn Skylight off. And I haven't quite figured out stop level. Let's hit question mark on it. So it sets the stop level for the mid sampling default to 0. Okay. So what mid sampling is just make sure that the sky, if you're using like an HDR enabling the skylight, that it's not reducing it for saving optimizations, that you're always using the highest quality as possible. All right, last and the best one so far is going to be global illumination. I'm sure I just passed it up. Here we go. So global illumination, do I have reflection still on? No, good. Global illumination, go ahead and turn it on. Okay, with global illumination on, the light propagation volumes aren't necessary. So our lighting setup is going to be a little bit different. If you've ever done renderings, you know that you have to get as much light in the scene as possible. So let me go to our light, and right now it's 9. I think I was using 15, and then I was bumping up the skylight somewhere around like, what was it, 8. All right, so this is global illumination, and let me show you. We'll go ahead and move the time of day, and it's updating constantly. And to get rid of the noise, we're definitely going to have to increase our sample count. And so global illumination is going to benefit from the most samples or the most light as possible. So to get more light into the scene, go into your lighting settings and try to bump them up. So, but until then, let's go ahead and go over some of these settings. So global illumination, let me make sure everything else is off. Reflections is off. Skylight is off. Okay, that was the problem. All right, and then for global illumination settings, the denoiser does exactly what it's supposed to do. Let me turn it off so you can see how. So this is what a noise scene looks like, and what the denoiser is going to do is obviously denoise. Now it looks a little fuzzy, so to get the fuzziness away, go ahead and increase our sample counts. So eval skylight does it evaluate the sky information? So you can actually turn that on. The performance loss is minimal to none, and it's combining the two maps together. So in this scene it's not bad, but if you were to have a directional light and an HDR in your skylight that are opposite of each other, it'll add both together in the final calculation. Alright, max bounces, I think we have it set to 1. Let's see, 1. I don't think we're going to get anything. Let's go over to the house. So we've got 1, 2, and you'll notice that lights coming in and we're getting more bounces. Let's do it back to 1. Alright, 2 more light, and then 3 even more light. And then the same thing over here. 1, 2. It's gonna light up underneath a little bit better. 3. And then you can keep going from there. So even if we did 10, your performance loss isn't as terrible as just going from 1 to 2. So this is 1 again, and I'll set it for 2. 2 gives us the most realistic without going crazy low. Okay, alright, and then to clean up the scene, we are going to make sure that our distance, I think I set it for 5,000 again. Don't do that to me every time. And then samples are going to be, right now I think it's using 1. And then 2. This is super performance impact. So 2 is going to half the calculation. And it's really going to clean up our scene. One way I've gotten rid of some of this noise, I know that we've already turned on the ambient occlusion and the noise wasn't there, so let's turn off the ambient occlusion. But we can't, so the noise has to be there, or the ambient occlusion has to be on. What I've been doing to get rid of the noise from the global illumination is going into the occlusion settings, ray trace occlusion, and turning off occlusion from ray tracing, and that will get rid of some of the noise, and then the rest of it is a matter of going back to the samples per pixel and getting it back to somewhere around like 4. Now, our performance is down to about 7 frames per second. I'm running a GTX 2080, and in the corner you can see the usage. We're overclocked to 2055 megahertz, so that's a very aggressive overclock for a 2080. So, but our scene looks fantastic. We're getting realistic lighting. It's 3 frames per second, and remember, in the demo they were using like RTX Quadros 6000s and 2 of them together. I just don't have that kind of money. But yeah, as you can see, that's all the settings so far. The only thing I haven't done again is the translucencies. But when I was making this video and doing everything else, coming through, and here's how I did that final rendering, is I went up here, screen percentage, I turned this all the way down, and I just went through the settings like this. So I went to my samples per pixel, turned it on, down to 1, made sure everything looked good, lined up the camera, and so I'll edit my scene, see what it looks like, and even if you make it smaller, you'll get more frames per second, and you can work around the scene. Like I said, it looks fantastic, man. That path tracing is just on point. So if we set up a sequence, or not, we'll do that later. I'll go ahead and turn on the ray tracing. We'll do 8 samples. So I'll line up the shot, and I will do, I'll turn down the screen percentage, so even when we make it full screen, that we're heavily impacted with performance, but we're trying to do our final rendering. I'm going to go ahead and turn on 8 samples. And we're down to, what is that, 3 frames per second? And it's not even moving. It's very, very slow. But as you see, when it's moving, it's updating all of the frame information. And then I'll turn on the reflections. What is it? Reflections? No, ray trace reflections. And this will cut it in half again. Alright, and then for the ray trace reflections, let's go ahead and turn on the screen percentage back to 100%. Boop. All right. Now it hasn't updated. You see the sphere over there? It looks really blocky. You're going to have to move the screen one frame and then it'll start updating. There it is. So now we've got 1 frame per second, but we've got everything enabled. GPU usage is really good. And to make this even better, we'll go ahead and go up here. And we'll change our screen percentage to 1080p, which would be just 100%. And that's going to put our frames per second down to about 1. And I'm going to turn off real time. There we go. All right. So that is right here is 1080p with all of the settings, and I just crashed it. Of course I did.